It gives you more insight into how, you know, the 13th Amendment and how that's the new form of Jim Crow and slavery. Okay. So we do that again. Okay, so this is a book by Michelle Alexander. She's an author, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. Michelle Alexander, she's an author. I recommend all you ladies go get this. We're gonna jump into some of this today from her book, some excerpts, and we're gonna get into Jim Crow and the new form of Jim Crow being mass incarceration and the 13th Amendment, how slavery never truly ended under the 13th Amendment. We're gonna jump into this, and I recommend all you ladies go get this book, okay? Everybody, welcome to the Daughters of Zion Sisterhood Development class. I am Rinnah, the National Minister of Education. We are under the leadership of Nasi Nasir X, our president. All right. So we're gonna go into the excerpt from her book. The PDF is attached. So we're gonna get into that. But I do recommend, if you ladies can, that you purchase this book, because it gave a lot of new insights when I took this as a sociology class in college, and we read this book. My professor was Italian, I think Sicilian, but we read this book, and it gave a lot of new insights into the new Jim Crow, and it gave a lot of insights into mass incarceration and the 13th Amendment and discrimination. All right. Are you able to get to the PDF book? If you're not able to get into the PDF book, we can jump into the links. If you just a minute later, Salaki. All right, because we're gonna read from Michelle Alexander. Hold on just a second. Hold on just a second. All right, sorry about that. Our host had to get the PDF open. Okay, so the new Jim Crow, mass incarceration in the age of colorblindness. Okay, so we're gonna read some excerpts from this book. I'm not sure if any of you ladies have heard of this book or read from this book, but we're gonna do some reading from this book today. All right, so the new Jim Crow, mass incarceration in the age of colorblindness. Michelle Alexander. You can keep going. I'll tell you where to stop. We're not going to read the whole thing. We're just going to read the part where it gets into Jim Crow, mass incarceration. Okay, here. I think we could start from here. The rebirth of the caste. You can go up a little bit, host. Go up a little bit. Where it says the rebirth of the caste. So you can start from there. That's the introduction. She's just introducing what the book is about there. So we're gonna hop into the book. All right. Where it says there we go, right there. All right. The rebirth of the caste. Ladies, anybody want to read? Would anyone like to volunteer to read? Anybody want to volunteer to read? All right.
It's not my strong suit, but if nobody else does.
Sister Aisha, you would like to read?
I don't mind. I just sometimes struggle. We'll see.
All right. If you just want to read like a few paragraphs, that's fine. Okay. Can you see it good?
Yeah, I gotta move this. I'm trying to figure out this new, since I downloaded that upgrade, it there we go. It like made a whole extra bubble of who's all here. Okay, my fault. So how you pronounce the rebirth of
The cast.
cast? Okay.
The E is silent. So it's the same thing as cast with the CAST.
Okay. And sister, can you give me the definition?
Right. The caste. So for example, it's a social class. It's a social class. So for example, in India, they have what's called the caste system. I don't know if y'all ever heard of that. And the caste system in India is a social status. But the caste system in India, they can't move up from that caste, right? So you have they have the untouchables. They call them the black untouchables or the Dalit people. Then I think the Brahmins, priests, they're like at the top. Then you have people in between. But the caste is basically it's a social ladder. That's what it is. It's a social ladder, right?
So it would be like me, the housekeepers.
But
Probably.
more so a societal social class.
Okay.
Okay, so you might have your caste with the workers on one level, with the middle class on this level, and then you're rich, you're elite. So that's a caste system. But in
Okay.
some societies in the caste system, the people on the bottom can't move up from that caste system, as in the case with India, right? They are once you're born into that caste system, you can never move up from that caste system. Now that's India. That's an extreme case, but that's not every type of caste system, but that's an example of what a caste system is. All right. So you'll have the black untouchables, for example, in India, aka the Dalit tribe. Once they're born into that caste, they can never move up and progress from that caste. And they do all the lower level jobs, right? Like they work in the sewers and stuff like that. And they're considered the untouchables of that society, right? They're considered untouchables compared to the upper level classes or the upper level caste. So that's just an example. Um, and see, even within that society, we most people don't consider people in India black, but they do have their black untouchables, right? They even had a Dalit Panthers out there in India. Some people aren't aware of this. The Dalit Panthers, aka the black untouchables, they call themselves black. Um, and their fight was pretty much the same thing as the Panthers over here, the fight against oppression and subjugation. So you did have a cast in India, the Black Untouchables, the Dalit Panthers, who they were inspired by the Panthers over here in America, and they were fighting for liberation. They were fighting for against oppression. Same thing, same thing, same thing. Same situation. All right. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem, sis.
Always something to be learned. You are a fountain of knowledge. I love these meetings. You teach so much in such a short amount of time. So here we go. The slave went free, stood a brief moment in the sun, then moved back again towards slavery. Webb Du Bois, Black Reconstruction in America. For more than 100 years, scholars have written about the illusory nature of the Emancipation Proclamation. President Abraham Lincoln issued a declaration proposing to free slaves held in Southern Confederate states, but not a single Black slave was actually free to walk away from a master in no states as a result. A civil war had to be won first. Hundreds of thousands of lives lost, and then, only then, were slaves across the South set free. And it was a really long period of time before Southern Texas even knew about it, wasn't it? I forgot
Yes.
how long it passed, but I know several messengers had been murdered on the way to let Southern Texas know. I remember reading up on that.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. Even that freedom proved illusory, though, as Webb Du Bois eloquently reminds us, former slaves had a brief moment in the sun before they were returned to the status akin to slavery. Constitutional amendments guaranteeing African Americans equal protection of the laws was the right to vote, proved as impotent as the Emancipation Proclamation once a white backlash against Reconstruction gained steam. Black people found themselves yet again powerless and relegated to convict leasing camps that were, in many ways, worse than slavery. Sunshine gave way to darkness, and the Jim Crow system of segregation emerged, a system that put Black people nearly back where they began in a sub subordinate subordinate.
Subordinate. Mm-hmm. Subordinate racial
Thank you.
caste.
Here we go.
Hallelujah. So what you see here is after slavery ended, there's a new form of segregation, discrimination, right? And that was Jim Crow. So they're saying that under the system of Jim Crow, right, where a lot of discrimination went on and subjugation and oppression went on against Black people, even though we're supposed to be free, a lot of Black people under the system of Jim Crow is still not in a good position, even in some cases worse, right? So we know that segregation was occurring at this time, but the thing about it is that Black people didn't have the same opportunities and didn't have equality under this segregated system, right? What happened? Oh, is everything okay? Oh, okay. All right. So yeah, Black people didn't have the same opportunities, right? They didn't have the same when it came to the school system, when it came to buses, when it came to restaurants. Black people were poorly treated under the system of Jim Crow, right? A lot of oppression, discrimination had went on. So yeah, so it's like even after slavery, not much has changed, right? We're probably not getting beat with whips and chains or getting lynched, right? You can't enter certain restaurants, right? You can't drink from certain water fountains, right? You can't go into certain bathrooms. We all know what Rosa Parks. If a white person was on the bus, even in the Black people had to move back, right? The Black people had to sit in the back. But then even if the Black people were sitting in the back, if a white person came on, there were no seats. The Black person still had to give up that seat too. So we know under the system of Jim Crow, it was mass. It was a lot of discrimination and subjugation that went on. Right.
Unfortunately, in some places that still exists. I think it was like 2008. It was a year or two before I had my 12-year-old. I went down with my adopted mom and my brothers. She's from south of Birmingham.
Mm-hmm.
And we stopped at a restaurant and we sat together. They brought me water, but they didn't bring my family water. So we just left. And then there was another place where just me and my brother went. and I just didn't feel right. Like the little hairs on the back of my neck didn't feel right, you know. And so I was like, Red, I'm gonna order your food and you order mine. And as soon as the waitress saw us switch plates and saw me take a bite, she came and grabbed my plate and
Wow. And
got up out of there.
you
So
know the
it's
thing
still
about
like
it is,
subliminal, and it's really disturbing.
yeah. Salaki, sorry to interrupt you. I didn't know you were. Um, I thought you were done. You know, some places is more insidious. Some places is more covert, right? Meaning they're not as open, they're more closeted with it. But then you go some places in the country, around the world, but we're talking about here in the States right now. There's some places you go, and guess what? It's very overt. Overt meaning, and these are two terms I learned in sociology: covert and overt. Covert means covered, closeted. Overt means open. So covert, covered, open, overt, open, right? In your face, obvious. So you have some parts of the country you can go to, and they'll say to our face, no N words allowed, right? Or whatever other slur, derogatory word, porch monkey, coon, whatever, whatever other slur. But there's some places you can go, and they do it more covertly, meaning they might do it under the form of redlining. Redlining was another form of discrimination, a discriminatory practice that went on, where the banks wouldn't lend to Black people who wanted to go into certain neighborhoods. Let's say they wanted to get a house in a suburban area, right, or wealthy area. What the banks would do is they would practice something called redlining, and redlining pretty much pushed people of color into the inner city area, the hoods, the ghettos. That was a practice of redlining, right? So they now there's other forms being used, right? There's other forms being used of discrimination, right? A lot of Black businesses, when they want a business loan, they're not able to get it. Mm-hmm. The banks or the lenders or the creditors would not give a lot of these Black businesses a loan, a business loan. And this even occurred during COVID. A lot of the small Black businesses that were affected by COVID, guess what? A lot of these business fell apart because you had the government, the grant money for small businesses, but a lot of people don't know that grant money wasn't extended to businesses that started with their own capital. That grant money, yes, Sister Aisha, that grant money was only extended to the businesses that got federal loans to start their businesses. So you have a lot of these small Black businesses who had to use their own funding to start their businesses. And now COVID hits, and these small Black businesses, think mom and pop shops, think your soul food restaurants, right? These Black businesses that started their business with their own capital can't even get access to federal grant money. The business grants, the aid, they didn't qualify because they didn't get their businesses started with the government funding. So you just see this continuous cycle. I wanted to point that out. There's still other forms of discrimination, discriminatory practices, systematic oppression that's occurring. Yeah, it might not be, like I said, it might not be whips and chains and all of that occurring and picking cotton, Yeah. Yep, Sister Charmaine. Yep. So a lot of the small Black businesses fell apart because under COVID, you know what happened, right? You know, the shutdown. There was these shutdowns, right? So a lot of the smaller businesses, they suffered. And then the government didn't even want to give the funding and the aid to the businesses that got started with their own money. It was like, okay, y'all didn't want to give us the funding to open up the business. We went and got started on our own. But now we have a pandemic. A lot of these businesses had to shut down under the pandemic. Now we don't even qualify for the aid money. So what happened? A lot of those Black businesses had to shut down, right? And were affected and suffered. So that's a new form of systematic oppression, because this is how people feed in their families. This is how people feed in their families. So sorry to get off track, ladies. I just wanted to point that out. All right. I wanted to point out that there's other forms of oppression. We're talking about incarceration. I just wanted to point out there's other forms of oppression that's done in a covert manner, meaning not as obvious, but it's done in a sly, insidious way. Okay. All right, host, are we able to the rubber? Can you stroll down to right? Thank you, Charmaine. Yeah, Mississippi just passed a new modern form of Jim Crow, a new Jim Crow law that rolled out. Let's try to go to where it gets into the mass incarceration. This talks about the birth of slavery. I'm not gonna read too much of her book, but where the host is strolling through now, this talks about the slavery, the death of slavery, chattel slavery. It does get into a bit of Bacon's Rebellion. That is something else I learned about in sociology. If you ladies want to support the host, support the author of this book, you can probably find the book on Amazon or other websites, so you can get into the book for yourself. Now this is a PDF that I'm reading from. I know it's a lot. It's a lot. So now this is talking about the death of Jim Crow. It's gonna talk. It gets into Jim Crow, the ending of Jim Crow. But it's gonna also talk about the system of mass incarceration, right? It's gonna talk about the 13th Amendment. There we go. The birth of mass incarceration. So the rhetoric of law and order was first mobilized in the late 1950s as Southern governors and law enforcement officials attempted to generate and mobilize white opposition to civil rights movement. In the years following Bourne versus Browder education, now for those of you ladies who are not familiarized with border BOE, I did surprisingly learn about this in social studies. BOE, or Brown versus Board of Education, it stated that you cannot be separate but equal, right? It stated you cannot be separate but equal, but the reason they said this is because they noticed that under the system of Jim Crow, where the races were separated, that Black people did not have the same access and opportunities. That's not to say we didn't build. Yeah, we worked together. Yeah, we built built the Black Wall Street, but they were treated very poorly compared to their white counterparts. Black people were treated very poorly under the system of Jim Crow. Their water fountains was dirty. Their books was raggedy. All right. The Black schools, the resources they had didn't even compare to what the white school children had, right? So this is why BOE, that's why that case was a thing. Brown versus Board of Education. That's why that case occurred. Why? The civil rights activists are saying, listen, under this system of Jim Crow, we don't have the same opportunities as white people. We don't have the same opportunities. You know, our resources are lacking, right? White people are getting top class treatment, right? Their resources are considered far above and superior than the resources that we are getting, right? So this is why you had the Brown versus Board of Education, or BOE. All right. Hold on, I have a text message. Somebody text. Salaki, sorry. The text back. All right. So civil rights activists use direct action tactics in an effort to force reluctant southern states to desegregate public facilities. Why? Because the treatment was unfair. Because there wasn't an equal treatment. Southern governors and law enforcement officials often categorize these tactics as criminal and argue that the rise of the civil rights movement was indicative of a breakdown of law and order. So they're saying this was a breakdown of law and order. Why? Oh, because you Negroes, you N-words don't know your place. Y'all getting out of line now. What do you mean you're fighting us for better rights and better liberties, right? And better resources, right? What do you mean you want equality? Y'all don't know your place no more, right? Right. So those who were partakers of white supremacy and those who believe that Black people were inferior and should stay in their place are saying that this is indicative of a breakdown in law and order. Where's the order? The order was keeping Black folk in line. We got to keep these Negroes in line. That's why you see the emergence and birth of the KKK and everything in a response to Black liberation. Support of civil rights legislation was derided by Southern conservatives as merely rewarding law breakers. What law are they breaking? Right? They're fighting for equal rights. For more than a decade, from the mid-1950s into the late 1960s, conservatives systematically and strategically linked opposition to civil rights legislation to calls for law and order, arguing that MLK, Martin Luther King Jr.'s philosophy of civil disobedience was a leading cause of crime. And you see how full of it they are, because MLK was a very peaceful man, right? He was peaceful. Civil rights protests were frequently depicted as criminal rather than political in nature. And federal courts were accused of excessive lenience toward lawlessness, thereby contributing to the spread of crime. So in the words of then Vice President Richard Nixon, the increase in crime rate can be traced directly to the spread of corrosive doctrine that every citizen possesses an inherent right to decide for himself which laws to obey and when to disobey them. So some segregationists went further, insisting that integration causes crime. Joe Biden. Sorry, we'll talk about that later. That integration causes crime, citing lower crime rates in southern states as evidence that segregation was necessary. In the words of Representative John Bell Williams, this exodus of Negroes from the South and their influx into the great metropolitan centers of other areas of the nation has been accompanied by a wave of crime. So they're saying, oh, these Negroes coming from the South into the North is increasing crime rates. What has civil rights accomplished for these areas? Segregation is the only answer, as most Americans, not the politicians, have realized for hundreds of years. So they see Black people as criminals, and they're saying that to mix and mingle Black and white people, it creates more crime. Unfortunately, at the time that civil rights were being identified as a threat to law and order, the FBI was reporting fairly dramatic increases in the national crime rate. Despite the significant controversy over the accuracy of these statistics, these reports received a great deal of publicity and were offered as further evidence of the breakdown in lawlessness, morality, and social stability. So to make matters worse, riots erupted in the summer of 1964 in Harlem, that's where I'm from, and Rochester, followed by a series of uprisings that swept the nation following the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1698. The racial imagery associated with the riots gave fuel to the argument that civil rights for blacks led to rampant crime. So they're trying to say, if you give these N words civil rights and liberties, it's going to make crime increase, right? Which is, we know, is a load of cow dung. So you have cities like Philadelphia and Rochester, both in the South. Rochester is upstate New York. Philadelphia is in PA, Pennsylvania, right? So cities like Philly and Rochester were described as being victims of their own generosity. So they're trying to say, listen, you give these Negroes generosity and rights, it's gonna lead to a breakdown in society, a decadence in society, and it's gonna lead to crime. They're criminals. That's what they're saying, right? So they said conservatives argue that having welcomed blacks migrating from the South, these cities were repaid with crime-ridden slums and black discontent. So we know that slavery occurred mostly in the southern United States, but there was a migration, a great migration of black Southerners to the North, places like New York City, places like Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, right? The northern states, right? And they fled to the North for better opportunities and due to the discrimination in the South, right? But now you have these whites in the North saying, this is what we get for giving these Negroes rights. They fled to the North, and now you see crime in the North, right? So Barry Goldwater in his 1964 presidential campaign aggressively exploited the riots and fears of black crime, laying the foundation for the Get Tough on Crime movement that would emerge years later. In a widely quoted speech, Goldwater warned voters, choose a way of the Johnson administration, and you have the way of mobs in the street. Civil rights activists who argued that the uprisings were directly related to widespread police harassment and abuse was dismissed by conservatives out of hand. They said if blacks conduct themselves in an orderly way, they would not have to worry about police brutality. Oh, wow. So they're saying these Negroes are out of order and they're disorderly, right? And they don't know how to conduct themselves. So the reason why they're being beaten and brutalized by the cops is because of their own doing. Argued West Virginia Senator Robert Byrd. Okay. All right, so let's see. So early on, little effort was made to disguise the racial motivations behind the law and order rhetoric and the harsh criminal justice legislation proposed in Congress. So early on, they were open with it. You know, they didn't have to do it covertly. They were open with their discrimination, right? The most ardent opponents of civil rights legislation and the segregation were the most active on the emerging crime issue. Well-known segregationalist George Wallace, for example, argued that the same Supreme Court had argued integration and encouraged civil rights legislation was now bending over backwards to help criminals. And the code word criminals they're using are black folk, right? So three other prominent segregationalists, you have Senators McLennan, Irwin, and Thurmond, led the legislative battle to curb the rights of criminal defendants. As the rules of acceptable discourse change, however, segregationalists distance themselves from an explicitly racist agenda. So we're about to get into the meat of potatoes, right? Of mass incarceration, of why our people are targeted so much, They developed instead the racially sanitized rhetoric of cracking down on crime, right? Rhetoric that is now used freely by politicians at every stripe. That still goes on, today, sisters. Because guess what? Right here in New York City, not too long ago, we had a mayor named Michael Bloomberg, and he instilled the racist stop and frisk policy. Now, this policy of stop and frisk targeted brown and black. They say minorities. I don't like the term minorities. We are not minor to anyone, right? And in fact, we are the majority, but that's for a different topic. So this stop and frisk law targeted the brown and black population, right? They would stop and frisk to see if people of color, black and brown, had any kind of weapons on them. This is what they do. And this is right here in New York City, where I am. Yeah, it wasn't that long ago.
In Chicago, we had the nut law.
What's that, sister?
The nut law where the police would stop you. It basically meant N-words under total suspicion. They would, Chicago police would do that. They would see you in a car. If you had a nice car, it was like, and they would literally be joking about it too. I used to hear when I was a kid, they would sit there like, yeah, we got to enforce that nut law. I'm like, nut law.
Yeah, they also say driving while black or DWB, where especially if they see black people with a nice car, they would assume they're a drug dealer or some criminal. Right? So the stop and frisk law with Mayor Mike Bloomberg, Jewish Mayor Mike Bloomberg, billionaire Mike Bloomberg, right, had instilled this stop and frisk law because according to him, we are the threat. And you know, he had to stop people of color, but would not target people of the Caucasian persuasion. When we know that people of the Caucasian persuasion commit just as much crime. You have a lot of white serial killers and mass murderers and school shooters, but he wouldn't stop them, right? So the people you are stopping and targeting, of course, those are going to be the people who wound up in prison the most, right? The same thing with drug raids. If you're targeting a particular community, if you say, I'm going to go into the black and brown community particularly, and I'm going to search I'm going to search them, and I'm going to, you know, target them. Of course, those are going to be the people who make up the prison population the most. Because in Michelle Alexander's book, and I remember learning about this in sociology as well, she mentioned that white people are involved in like 8 times more drug-related criminal activity. And they sell narcotics to one another. And we even had white people in our class, because I was going to school in Staten Island at the time. They have a large Italian population. And the professor asked the white students in the class, do you think black and Hispanics commit more crime? And the white students were very honest. And they said, no. They said, in our areas, you see them doing crack, you see them selling crack, you see them involved in the same stuff, but not more. But they're not targeted. The police aren't raiding these areas. They're not going into these areas. They're skipping over those areas. They're going in particular areas, right? So the areas they're going in and they're finding the drugs, well, we know these crimes are being committed in all across the board in every community. But if you're targeting a specific community, you're going to find crime in those communities, right? So you had the white students in the class saying, no, our communities are just as bad when it comes to drugs. Our communities are just as bad when it comes to crime. But the police aren't coming and raiding them like that. So that's why you don't see us going to prison as much. Okay? So yeah, this was discussed all in my sociology class. You know, so they're 8 times more likely to be involved in drug-related activity, but not as likely to be targeted. not as likely to have communities rated, right? So that's where you get the disparity, the racial disparity within the criminal justice system, which needs to be targeted and need to be changed. All right.
And that's white privilege.
Of
And,
course.
and the term minority come from, the population of colored folks is actually less than white folks. It's uh, starting to even out, and eventually it's going to be more black folks than white folks pretty soon. But
Yeah, but Con.
but but that just shows you that by population, black folks have been always targeted a lot more, because like you said, white folks commit more crimes and there's more of us. So theoretically it should be way more white folks in prison than black folks, but it's just all this legalized slavery you're talking about.
Con, exactly, Sister Aisha, and thank you for being honest. Thank you for being honest about that. Thank you for being upfront and honest about that. It's very true. It's very true. And some people would say it's classism. It's classism. If you're black and you prefer a good lawyer, but even sometimes then, because you could take a poor white person, a poor black person, and still it's who's gonna receive the harsher penalty or crime for the same exact crime. So it's not always boiling down to money. Yeah, money has some aspect if you can afford a good lawyer, but it's not the totality. Ladies, can you hear me? All right. It's not the totality. Classism is a separate issue. But we live in a racialized society as well. And even addressing what Sister Aisha said about the minority concept versus the majority, that term white Caucasian, they're listing the Latinos and the Middle Eastern and the North Africans as white as well. So you have some people who are brown who are also being classified as white. And that makes a white population look bigger than it really is. Right? You had a black Egyptian man come here, Nubian, and they try to force the man to put white on the form. So it's more, that's what we get into, the caste system of black being specified for a particular group of people, which is usually the descendants of slaves, and keeping us in that bottom position. Just a minute. So I apologize, sisters. My little one just told me my oldest daughter has a fever. I'm not gonna be too long. I thought it was allergies, but it looked like she might be sick. Did somebody raise their hand, or was that by accident? Okay.
Nah, I raised my hand.
Was that
This,
Sister Charmaine?
yeah. Can y'all call me Jay, please?
Oh, no problem. Jay. Got
Okay.
it.
I don't want to get off. It's on subject, and I don't want to take too long so you can get on to your lessons. But I think that we got to start thinking in a different manner. The reason why it's like it. I haven't always been able to live normally because of my upbringing. So I'm actually come from what we would say in a terminology, the streets. Okay. And looking back on having been able to look at both sides of being what I would say living as a normal citizen versus being in the streets and doing illegal things because of my situation, and being able to see both sides, and I lived a couple of places. I have noticed that when other outsiders see a group of people and they are conflicting with each other, but they're together, like a family or friends or a block of people. But people don't realize that people pay attention. So when they look in on these group of people and they see weakness, they're going to prey upon that. And that's us as Black people. We prey upon each other in a way that now is different. Like Caucasian people, The only worst thing I think that they do when it comes to killing with us is, outside of taking people in, trying to take over, the obvious is killing that, getting up and killing their family. That's just something we don't fucking do. But on the other hand, like, they stick together in a different type of way. And when they go murder, they murdering people they really don't know, or a true enemy, ain't somebody that they ain't kicked it with, been in the community half the time like that. So when they see Black people, we kill each other in a different way for the dumbest shit. Excuse my language. I'm trying to work on my cussing. I'm going to therapy for it. I'm working on it. I'm a progress in work, so bear with me with that. I think it comes to a point where they look at us as we weak because we conflict with each other so much. We have to teach each other to be able to come together first, which is going to be one of the hardest things to do because of all the brainwashing and us being brainwashed to hate each other and ourselves. So when we can get past that point, then we can get our people to understand and realize, and the information hit them more once we able to come together. As long as we can steady conflicting with each other the way we are, killing each other, killing our children, trying to kill somebody else, crazy in the craziest ways, then they won't look at us as weak. If we can look as a culture of people strong, we will be able to get more accomplished. And we have to stop asking for permission, and look for, like, we'll ask for forgiveness later, forget permission. When we're doing these announcements and we're doing these whatever we're doing, when we out in public and we're trying to fight for our rights or get our rights back, we always sound like we're asking for permission when it's our right. It's like saying that we got to ask permission to be children of God. It's our right. And once we understand that we don't have to ask permission, and we can get together as a whole and look as a whole, as an ethnic group, we'll get way more accomplished. But as long as we look weak and we're steady fighting amongst each other, it's gonna be, I ain't gonna say that it can't happen, but it's gonna be harder, and the process gonna be slower if we just can't focus on getting us together and educating us at the same time. And that's it. I'm done.
Thank you for sharing that. I agree that we can get things done more on our own without having to beg for or ask for or plead for it. I do think that is very true. I do think, as far as you mentioned, the self-hatred, and the self-loathing and how we treat each other, I think that's true as well. But that all is a part of the program, and the deep conditioning and mind programming and indoctrination, right? And brainwashing. So in order to come out of that, we have to unlearn and relearn ways and patterns that we've been taught. That's why here at the Line of Judah Armed Forces, TLOJAF, and the Daughters of Zion Sister Development class, we stress and emphasize that we want to break those generational curses, right? We want to unlearn and relearn, right, for the betterment of the community. Now, when we tackle and target issues, we're not just tackling targeted issues from outside of the community, like police brutality and racism. We're also tackling and talking about issues within the community as well. So that means, our people killing each other, our people killing the babies. Line of Judah Armed Forces, when our boots on the ground, when those babies were killed in Minnesota, right? When those babies were shot in the head, and they tackled that. That was an issue that we tackled as well, right? Or the brethren, that's an issue the brethren tackled, right? So listen, I totally understand, Jay. I understand. I overstand. I understand what you're saying, and I wholeheartedly agree that we have to stop the self-loathing mentality. That we need not beg, we need not plead. We need to get things done on our own, and that's why we also stress and emphasize self-sufficiency. Because when you're self-sufficient, you don't have to rely on the system. You don't have to rely on the other nations. We can get things done on our own. We're more than capable enough. We have the resources. Our spending power is what, 2 trillion or something like that. I know it's in the trillion. Collectively, our spending power is what we choose to spend our money on and support is the issue. And that's a part of breaking a cycle and old patterns as well, and the re-education, right? So to the Robert for sharing that. Okay, so posts. I think we could read more from. I don't think we quite got into the meat and potatoes yet of the book. Let's see. But we could read a little bit more. Like I said, my baby has a fever. We could read a little bit more. Matter of fact, you can probably, let me see. See if you could stroll down a little bit more. Because I want to get into where they say the 13th Amendment. There should even be a way where we can search and go directly to that part. If you can't find it, no worries. I do have some other jewels as well, where it talks about the 13th Amendment. But y'all, please support this sister, Michelle Alexander. She is powerful. She is, listen, she is talented. That book is amazing, and I highly recommend it. How the 13th Amendment kept slavery alive, perspectives from the prison where slavery never ended. So even though we didn't get into this with the book, this covers the same topic, right? This covers the same thing, the same information. So it says the three people share their stories of strength and perseverance through decades of wrongful incarceration at an Angola prison. Now this is in Angola, right? We know this is one of the countries where during the slave trade it was shipping back and forth going on. Angola, Central Africa. It says when the 13th Amendment was ratified, anybody want to read before I jump in? Going once, going twice. All right, no, okay.
If you can blow it up a little bit, I'll read it.
That's Sister J?
Yeah.
All right. Are you able to see
That's
that?
enough. You're good. All right.
All right.
When the 13th Amendment was rectified in 1865, slavery was formally abolished throughout the United States, except as punishment for crime. In reality, the policy only abolished chattel
slavery.
Chattel slavery, the form of slavery in which a person is considered the property of another. Other clients, especially those wrongly imprisoned in the South, spent years working in prisons for a mere cents per hour, while those beyond prison's walls profited from the work. Some call the conditions modern day slavery, but those who live through it will tell you there's nothing moderate about it. Those 5 words, except as punishment for a crime, carved out a exception that enabled incarcerated people to be used as free and forced labor and paved the way for mass incarceration, particularly of Black Americans that we still see to this day. Today, prisoners in most states are paid a normal wage in the range of cents per hour for the work. However, a few states, including Texas, Georgia, and Florida, do not pay prisoners at all, and private companies save millions of dollars each year by contracting prison labor. But nowhere in the evolution of slavery into mass incarceration more clearly seen than in places like Parchman Farm in Mississippi and Louisiana, Anglolia, I can't say it right, Angolia Farm, from which 8 innocent project clients have been freed so far. Below, 3 wrongly convicted people, innocent project clients, Malcolm Alexander and Henry James, and innocent project New Orleans client Calvin Duncan, share these stories of survival and strength across decades of incarceration in American bloodiest prisons. Bloodiest prison, excuse me.
Exactly. Thank you, sister. So here you see, right? It's talking about exactly what Michelle Alexander's book spoke about this is a form of new Jim Crow, right? And this is a form of modern day slavery. They said, okay, chattel slavery was when they had our ancestors in the chains and whips and stuff like that. When they're saying that, okay, that's over. That's abolished. But there's a stipulation. If you commit a crime under the 13th Amendment, you're still a slave. You're still doing this cheap slave labor. And some people aren't even paid a cent at all, right? So either being paid cents by the hour or you're being paid nada, nothing, zilch, right? So under the 13th Amendment, slavery still exists. Slavery still exists. It was never truly abolished. They gave it a different name, and they did it in a sly, insidious way. And they said, if you commit a crime, if you're a felon, look, you're a slave, right? So who does that impact the most? That impacts our community the most, right? So you have fathers torn out of homes, right? That impacted a lot of us as well. Because see, here's the problem. The problem is when we had things like the 1980s crack epidemic, right? And was it Nixon, the war on drugs, under that whole campaign of the war on drugs, right? Now we know, some of us may not know, a lot of us do, that COINTELPRO, the CIA, the FBI, the governmental agencies were responsible for dropping off these drugs in our communities. And there was actually a Nobel Prize winner, a white man, who came out and exposed this. Ironically, surprisingly, he wound up dead, right? For exposing. He said, look, the CIA is behind the scenes, the government is saying war on drugs. They're fighting the war on drugs. But behind the scenes, these governmental agencies are the ones supplying the drugs, right? They're going to these foreign countries in Latin America, and they're allowing the drugs to come in and to be imported into strategically targeting the Black communities, right? So this is what's going on. So it's this whole system. It's this whole system, the war on drugs, Oh, but we're going to drop the drugs in your community. And not only are we going to drop the drugs in the community, we're not going to hire you for jobs. So now you can't get a job. My mother taught me this. So now you can't get a job, right? So now these men can't get a job, right? So what are they going to do? They're going to turn to the streets. They're going to sell drugs. Unfortunately, a lot of our people have turned to the streets to sell drugs to make a living, right? But we're talking about at a time where there was mass systematic oppression, where you could walk in because of the color of your skin, you wasn't being hired, right? It's probably not as extreme today, but this was happening. So during the 80s, they was fighting the war on drugs, but they were the ones providing the drugs. And then they were locking up Black men. They were locking up Black men for selling the same drugs that they dropped off. So this took a lot of fathers out of the home. Now you had the single mother households, right? You had a lot of single mother households. You had a lot of children within the foster care system because their mama was on drugs. Their daddy was on drugs. Their mama or daddy might have sold drugs, right? Their mama and daddy might have sold drugs and were also partaking in doing drugs. So you also had a lot of our people wound up in the foster care system, and a lot comes along with that mentally. So this is a whole big strategic plan, right? So you see a lot of trauma, generational trauma, emerge from that as well. So I just wanted to point that out. Let's see if we could get more into the article. So it's talking about the brief history of Angola, and it was saying after chattel slavery was abolished in 1895, it says Jim Crow laws were designed to limit the freedoms of the newly emancipated slaves. Okay, so now Jim Crow, now chattel slavery ends, right? Y'all not in chains no more. We're not whipping y'all with these whips no more. But now let's set in place these Jim Crow laws, right? Where these freedoms for the slaves, the freedmen was our people who were freed from slavery. They were referred to as freedmen, right? They were now free. there were stipulations on their freedom were almost immediately instituted at the state and local levels, right? So it says that such policy imposed curfews on Black people, well, like their children, right? Go up a little bit more, please. All right. So imposed curfews on Black people prevented them from getting certain kinds of jobs, like I just mentioned, right? And this is not us playing victim mentality. This is not us saying that we can't thrive. It's just saying that we know that systemic or systematic oppression and subjugation existed. And it's undeniable proof that it existed. And it still exists in certain ways today. And it kept them out of certain neighborhoods. The last of these laws were struck down as recently as the 60s with the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act. So at one point, our people couldn't even vote. As punishment for violating these laws, also called the Black Codes laws. So now we're going to get into the Black Codes laws. That's another form of systemic racism. Black men, women, and children will be sent to prison and were frequently leased out as labor to private businesses, including plantations and mines, under a system known as convict leasing. So those of you who haven't heard of convict leasing, slavery is ended now. Now you have something called convict leasing. So the system incentivized the mass incarceration of Black people to create a supply of cheap, if not altogether free, prison labor to replace the slave labor upon which the plantations and other industries had previously relied. So even though chattel slavery ended, you're now using these prisoners to do the cheap labor. So Angola, named for the country where most of its slaves came from, was one of those plantations. After the abolition of chattel slavery, Angola relied on the labor of prisoners leased from Louisiana State Penitentiary. So it says, however, in 1898, the convict leasing system was banned, right? So this went on almost into the 1900s. That wasn't that long ago. The state of Louisiana then purchased the 18,000-acre plantation in 1901, establishing the Louisiana State Penitentiary on the grounds and taking control of the prisoners previously leased to the plantation. You see the men here? These are prisoners with the shovels, and they're working the plantation. How much has really changed? How much has really changed between when our people were picking cotton in the field? They're still in the field. They're still working for little to nothing, right? And so in Angola prison in 1934, American singer, what did it say? Angola prison in 1934. It's showing prisoners leased to harvest timber in Florida. 1915. It's the 1900s, y'all. A lot of our grandparents was born in that time. A lot of our great grandparents was born in that time. How much has really changed, right? But they talk about we don't need reparations, please. Today, the prison spans 18,000 acres. Most of its farmland and its slavery era name is still in use. About 5,300 people are incarcerated at Angola, and approximately 1,800 people work there, many of whom live with their families on the prison grounds, which includes schools, a golf course, tennis courts, and a pool for their use. Oh, so they give them these little resources to try to smooth things over, right? People incarcerated at Angola are paid a few cents an hour to work the same fields, picking cotton. They're still picking cotton, right? Corn and more from the same land slaves were forced to work 200 years ago. They're still picking cotton. Some incarcerated people are even tasked with fishing, cooking, and doing repair work for the free men, as people in prison at Angola calls the prison staff. So it says Angola is essentially a place where slavery never ended. Never ended. Malcolm, Henry, and Calvin all spent time in the fields of Angola after being wrongly convicted in separate crimes that occurred within years of each other. So these men were wrongly convicted. That's why I said we can't even say that, oh, they're in prison, they landed themselves in prison. What about the people who are wrongly convicted and in prison? Who've been here for 20, 30, 40, 50 years because of case of mistaken identity? Can y'all hear me? My Wi-Fi sometimes be acting up. Me and Spectrum gonna have to have it out.
It's back now. But they still do this. My baby's dad was in a prison camp in South Dakota that they had them working the land and doing factory work for 38 cents an hour. And some of them, if they got in trouble for dumbest stuff, you know, not standing outside they cell fast enough for count or whatever, wouldn't get paid for the day.
Just horrendous. What was it? Where did you say this occurred at, sister? What state, city?
I have to find the letters. He been out since AJ made 5, but AJ 12 now, so that's been 7 years. But it was in South Dakota, and it was near the river. I know we crossed the river, and that was right there when we went to see him. But it was terrible. And what really turns my stomach is a lot of these plantations and stuff are like tourist attractions for white folks. It makes me so sick. So sick. Sorry.
I'm sorry to hear that. That's horrendous.
It's a lot of prisons doing that.
It's horrendous. Yeah, they're doing it and they're getting away with it. You know why they're getting away with it?
And privately owned prisons, that really makes me nauseous. That is just.
Listen, the whole thing is a business. That's why you can go to upstate. I'm in New York, so if you go to like Rochester, ooh. If you go to like the upper part of New York State, man, they're very overt with their racism. Overt. They're like very in your face with it. Like they will call you the N-word to your face 10 times and laugh. And because upstate New York is where a lot of the prisons are here, it's not only it's a business and it's a source of income and jobs for a lot of people upstate as well. So a lot of your COs, your corrections officers, your police, that prison system is work for them. So the whole thing is a business. All right, it's a business. I'm really sorry to hear about your child's father, sister. That's horrific.
Yeah, it was a long 4 years for all of us. Like I can't imagine being him, but that's why like it took him a long time to like be okay with being out too, with all the trauma that he experienced there. And I think that's a whole nother issue that a lot of ADOS men have to deal with. Like we know that Black men are locked up for no damn reason, just for being Black while driving or whatever the police feel like doing. And there's not enough support for them for when they get out. And these halfway houses just treat them like another number still. It's like once they get locked into the prison system, the system don't want to let them go. Just like for me, the welfare system, you know, like my employment counselor, like, basically dared me to get a job. Like, no, you don't really want that. I'm just going to have your doctor sign this letter. You know, we'll extend your welfare. Like, they don't really want to let you go. They don't want to see you advance yourself. And that's the same with these men getting out of prison. There's not enough for them to get them to reestablish. And like you said, they, you know, they get out, they don't make enough money, so they go back to what they know how to do. And that's a serious problem.
They go back to what they know how to do, and the system is depending for them to return to the street so that they can wind up back in the prison system. And then once again, they benefit off of that. They benefit off of that because without the prison system existing, COs wouldn't have their jobs. Police officers wouldn't have their jobs. Right. The cheap labor, prison labor slave labor. You know, they need the prisoners for all of these things. So they're depending on these. It's strategic. It's strategic. They're depending on these people to go back to prison so they can benefit and profit from it. Right? So like I said, I'm sorry to hear that about your child's father. That's horrific. And they get away with it because under that 13, I think that 13th Amendment need to be abolished or need to be at least modified. I mean, there needs to be a modification. And if we have the right brother or sister who gets into politics and who could target and tackle that legislation with the 13th Amendment and the slave labor, because it's ridiculous. It's really ridiculous how they can get away with doing this, and it's perfectly legal that if you commit a crime, but then you might not have committed the crime because as we see, these brothers were falsely imprisoned. So it's like, how do you know how many people are falsely accused?
That and the other thing, Bill Clinton really screwed people with the penal system, because then if you get a same or similar, then you get even more time. And that's what happened with him too. Like there's so many different crooked things that covert, you said, that we don't really know. It's built into the law to, you know, once you in the system, you're locked in for life, and don't breathe wrong or they're gonna find a way. And it's a lot needs to be changed, a lot. But yeah, getting that amended, but also out doing privately owned prisons, because it don't make no sense that we got billionaires profiting from legalized slavery. Essentially, it's really just
Exactly.
I don't understand how these folks sleep at night. I really
They don't have a conscience. It's called a sociopath. Sociopaths and psychopaths don't have a conscience. That's the whole thing about it. Sociopaths, they're missing that sense of empathy that a normal human being has. So mentally, psychologically, socially, so a sociopaths or psychopaths, they can sleep perfectly at night because they don't have a
think most people, most white folks must be sociopaths then, because when I have these conversations with people to try to get them to learn how to pay reparations, or even some white people I know that think they woke or know stuff, they don't really get it. And I might have my blind spots too with my proximity, but that's a whole nother can of worms. But like, I don't, that's a piece that I really struggle with, even in my own family. Like, why is it so hard for white folks to even see black folks as peoples? Like they don't see them even, y'all, I'm sorry, like human. Like they don't. And that's still in the Constitution somewhere too, the 3/4 beats uh label or whatever. Like it's serious. It's really disturbing.
Yeah, because of when you've been taught it for so long and generationally, that mindset and mentality has been passed on. And then it's also the ones who probably don't practice it outright. There's microaggressions or other things that's there that many don't realize that they're operating within that mentality. You know, so they might think, oh, we're not. Jane Elliott, she points that out a lot too. She's like kind of a sociologist, and she's able to point out that with a lot of white folks as well. You know, but thank you for being honest, and I'm really sorry to hear what happened to your kid's father.
Feel
Host.
free to check me at any time too if I slip, because
No, sister, you listen. I know that you try your best, and you at least you can see things for what it is. You call a spade a spade. You call a spade a spade.
or a sociopath, like
Yeah, a
it's a
sociopath.
serious problem. It's passed down just as bad as the PTSD gene is passed down between ADOS and indigenous people. The sociopath, the sense of entitlement, or just living in their own bubble, like nothing else exists outside their bubble.
Man, living in
And
two different
how do we,
worlds.
like, I'm still like, I be getting exhausted trying to pop these bubbles, like get through to people. I don't, Like they're not even happy in their own bubble. Why do they want to stay there? Sorry, I'm done now.
Yeah, because it gets, if you gotta address it head on, it will be uncomfortable, right? That's why it's the uncomfortability aspect, right? So host, let me see if we can dig a little bit into this article more. See if there's anything else I want to read from here. So it says, it talks about Angola is 75% incarcerated there are Black. Another vestige of slavery still visible at the prison, which is the country's largest, and 70% of Angola's population, all 3 men were sentenced to life. So they were falsely accused, well, wrongly convicted, sorry, and they were sentenced to life. And then it says Louisiana has the highest rate of exonerations in the country, with 64 people having been exonerated in the state to date. However, this figure reflects only the wrongful convictions we know about that have resulted in exonerations. And though Malcolm, Henry, and Calvin were all free today, their experiences of wrongful convictions still weigh heavily on them. All right, and then these are the men who were wrongly convicted, as you can see. And Malcolm Alexander, he said freed and exonerated in 2018 after 38 years. That's 38 years of this man's life that he can't get back. And even if they paid him off, man, that's still 3 decades almost of your life gone. It was like you see in old pictures of slavery, right? It's Malcolm Alexander. So very unfortunate. Then you have Henry James, and he was free and exonerated in 2011 after 29 years of prison. Another one, almost three decades. Wrongful conviction. He said, I'm still getting shortchanged. It's unfortunate. And then you have Calvin Duncan. He was freed in 2011 after more than 28 years of prison. So another one, almost 3 decades of their life they can't get back. Yeah, they might get the money, they paid them millions of dollars, but that's still a whole chunk of your life. The 13th Amendment didn't end slavery for people like me. And that's it. That's their brother's stories. And this is happening every day. This is real life. This is not TV. This is not a drama fiction story, right? This is not Law and Order or Criminal Minds. This is happening in real, actual life to real, actual people. Real individuals and real families are being affected, are being impacted tremendously. This is some real stuff here, right? All right, I believe there was one more. I believe there was one more. Is there another one there? I believe I had. So this gets into the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, abolition of slavery in 1865. As it says that President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation declaring all persons held as slaves. Hold on, I gotta. Within any state or designated part of a state, the people wherefore shall then be in rebellion against the United States shall be thenceforth and forever free. Nonetheless, the Emancipation Proclamation did not end slavery to the nation, since it only applied to areas of the Confederacy currently in its in the Confederacy currently in a state of rebellion, and not even in the loyal border states that remain in the Union. So it says Lincoln recognized that the Emancipation Proclamation would have been followed by a constitutional amendment in order to guarantee the abolishment of slavery. The 13th Amendment was passed at the end of the Civil War, before the Southern states had been restored to the Union, and should have easily passed on to Congress. However, though the Senate passed it in April 1864, the House initially did not. At that point, Lincoln took an active role to ensure passage through Congress. He insisted that passage of the 13th Amendment be added to the Republican Party platform for the upcoming 1864 presidential election. His efforts met with success when the House passed the bill in January 1865 with a vote of 119 to 56. So on February 1st of 1865, President Abraham Lincoln approved the joint resolution of Congress submitting a proposed amendment to the state legislatures. The necessary number of dates, 3/4, ratified by December 6, 1865. The 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution provides that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to the jurisdiction. With the adoption of the 13th Amendment, the United States found a final constitutional solution to the issue of slavery, right? The 13th Amendment, along with the 14th and 15th, is one of the trio of Civil War amendments that gratefully expanded the civil rights movements of Americans. But keep in mind, look at the code language here, right? Not for us, because guess what? Those of us who are either affected by mass incarcerations or have loved ones affected by mass incarceration, they still are treated poorly and treated as slaves today, right? Under this unfair, harsh judicial system. Keep that in mind. All right, keep that in mind. Was there one? I think there was one final one with the video. Convict leasing. We're gonna look at a little bit of this with the convict leasing. This is 13th Amendment, right? We're gonna look at a little bit of that video. Are we able to play a little bit? And it shows what the brothers are going through here.
The labor system that took shape in the late 19th century developed coercive means to ensure that cotton remained king. It was called convict leasing. Get arrested on a minor charge or a trumped-up charge, you could find yourself locked up and then hired out to a corporation bidding on inmate labor. The pipeline from prisons to profits in this country has deep roots.
The aftermath of slavery was in some ways worse than slavery itself. Unlike before, when someone who owned you, driving you too hard was counterproductive because you would lose your investment. Convict leasing was different. You could get them cheaper, and if you actually drove them to death, there was more where that came from.
In the 13th Amendment, which ends the institution of slavery, of course, there is a loophole. Convicts who have been convicted of a crime, they actually can be forced to work for free.
In Alabama in 1850, 99% of the people who were incarcerated were white. In Alabama by the 1880s, 85% of the people incarcerated were black. So we could have a debate about how many of those black people were actually innocent, or we could have a conversation about the use of the criminal justice system to target both the innocent and the guilty alike. That continues all the way to the present, where even today, about just under 40% of the nation's prisoners are black, and yet the African-American population is about 13%. They are snatching up bodies everywhere to fuel this system.
The idea in which more money can be made out of their incarceration is still very much part of our criminal justice system.
So you see there a convict leasing, ladies. You see there, right? It said that these prisoners were in some cases worse off than our enslaved ancestors were under the system of chattel slavery. That's deep. This is a horrendous practice. This is a horrendous, awful, dehumanizing practice, right? And this goes to show you the disparities and the racial prejudice biases in the judicial system that needs to be changed, modified, altered, tackled, and this needs to be addressed, right? This needs to be done away with. This 13th Amendment constitutional amendment we have needs to be eradicated completely, right? Or modified. Well, this shouldn't even be going on.